Hi friends, welcome to Behind the Returns. This is your host Arun and I head the MF research at Funds India. As always, we have a super interesting guest with us. We have Mr. Shankaran Naren, the CIO of ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund. He is also one amongst the best value investors in the country. Hi Naren, super
Hi.
excited to have you and looking forward to a great conversation.
Hi.
Uh, yeah. So, Naren, just to start off with, as you obviously know, value investing has been going through a very tough time over the last 10, 12 years. If you look at the global context and also from the Indian context, value investing has been going through some tough period. While it's not as long as the global counterparts, but nevertheless. So, what do you think is the reason why value as a style is uh, I mean, is underperforming for this long stretches, and for anybody who's invested into value investing as a style in terms of funds, how should they view this underperform? How should they put this in perspective?
See, actually, our view is that it's primarily to do with the role of Fed. I think the Fed brought down interest rates to zero. And in my opinion, somewhere if you take down interest rates to zero, uh, that has had a pretty negative impact on value investing. I was reading an interesting research piece which says that if you bring down interest rates to zero, what happens is that you give a higher value to terminal growth, terminal value, and you give a lower value to current earnings and current dividend and those kind of things. So a number of technology stocks in the Western world where you don't have current earnings or current dividends, but you seem to have higher confidence on the terminal growth or terminal value. They have got re-rated very significantly. And so I would view that it is the Fed which is primarily responsible for this entire outperformance of value growth against value. And if you look at it, what is happening at this point of time is that in the Western world, they have decided that the only thing which the policymakers can do is cut interest rates and buy bonds. And if you follow that principle, you are in a situation where the people who have assets, their net worth keeps increasing, and that is what seems to be happening, particularly in countries like US, for example. And that I think is the real reason. To me, if you ask me, I think we are in the last stages of that. Why do I think like that? I think because the level of excesses in US is crossing all proportions. So if you look carefully at some of the stocks in US, it is becoming like 1999. And you have companies with no earnings, those stocks keep going up. And it resembles 1999. And my belief is when something becomes entirely irrational, it doesn't last too long. So my reading is we are possibly in the last stages. And people ask me what can be the trigger. In my opinion, it has to be politics. And we are talking ahead of the US election. So my reading is it is the US election which is likely to be the trigger, which can cause the value to do well again. Luckily for us in India, what has happened is we have not had zero interest rates. We have had a Reserve Bank which has been much more conservative. And consequently, we have not seen the kind of excesses that we have seen in the West, which is why the level of value underperformance is not as much, and the value did not underperform all the time. Although in recent times, the underperformance has been substantial, but that's because post-COVID, we have had massive monetary easing. in line with the Western world. And so it has been there in the recent past, but it is not a long-term phenomenon like what you've seen in the Western world. And you've had a much more conservative monetary policy than what you've seen in the Western world. So that is the kind of situation. And so I would say it is tough. And I believe the toughest people in this has been the people who have used conventional definitions of value and not used the more modern definitions of value, which allow you to buy many of the tech companies because they all have very strong moats. And many of the modern value investors actually have moved to definitions of value which include moats. And that has allowed them to buy many of the US tech companies because they have very strong moats. And they have actually had a very good situation.
Naren, we've also noticed that be it across the world or be it domestic, over long periods of time, all good fund managers have to go through their periods or phases where they underperform. So would it be fair to assume that short-term underperformance is a compulsory or a necessity for long-term outperformance? And if that remains true, that's not true for other aspects of life. Let's say we go to a restaurant, a good restaurant remains consistent in how they provide food, or somebody who does well in school consistently does well across the school or college. But in other phases of life, we have the consistency remaining for a long period of time. But why is it different in investing? So why does underperformance become a necessary condition for long-term outperform? How should somebody think through this, which is not common with what we otherwise normally experience in other aspects of life?
Very, very nice question you have asked me. And it's something that we have debates and many people ask me about this. So the reason is very simple here. The price in the marketplace is not set by us. The price in the marketplace is set by buyers and sellers. So when the price in the marketplace is set by buyers and sellers, and I don't control the price of buyers and sellers, I don't control buyers and sellers. Because I don't control the buyers and sellers, what happens is that you have a situation where it is not possible for you to be consistent. You can be only consistent in process. Frankly, the debt market is even worse because not only if you're a debt fund manager, you don't control the buyers and sellers. Frankly, in debt market, there is a referee. That referee is the central bank, and the central bank is omnipresent in debt markets, and they are much bigger than a buyer and a seller. So what happens is it is impossible to be consistent. That's because the price of the buyer and seller is decided by the buyer and the seller, not by you. And that is why periodically what happens is that there are people who decide that I want to determine the price of the buyer and seller. So, for example, Arshad Mehta was one such person. So, if you look at what happened to Hunt Brothers in silver, was something like that. So, they decide that I'm going to decide the price of silver. So, then you can be consistent. So, the goal of ICICI Mutual Fund is not to decide the price of any share. It's not that to decide the price of any investment. It is to follow a process. So when you're trying to follow a process and the market decides the price of the buyer of the market of a share, you can only be consistent in following a process. Why is it different from other things? Suppose you go to a restaurant and you order a particular food item. And when you order that food item, there is no price of seller and price of buyer. There is a taste of that food item. So that is dependent on your taste. It is not dependent on the price of the buyer and seller. So once the price of the buyer and once the mood of the buyer and the seller and the buyer and the seller decides the price, there is this problem. But otherwise, in other things, you can be more consistent because of that reason. That's why, you take, for example, take an area like movies. Why is it that you cannot predict whether a movie will do well or badly is because of the same reason, because a movie can be produced by any great director, but finally whether that movie is success or failure is determined by the audience, and the audience decides whether a movie is successful or not. It is not something that everyone cannot say that every movie produced by a directed by this director will be a success, because at the end of the day it is again like a buyer and seller kind of model. That is why you have movies directed by a famous director which bomb, and there are movies directed by a famous director which could turn out to be biggest successes, because finally at the end of the day it is determined by the audience, and in this case the audience is the buyer and the seller. So, and the buyer and the seller is at various points of time determined by the behavioral finance models, etc. So, for example, take real estate. In 2010 the real estate was overvalued, but it went on till 2013. So for 4 years, it was overvalued. But when it was overvalued for 4 years, what happened due to that? Because overvaluation was for 4 years, the extent to which real estate has been underperforming, let's say in Chennai or Mumbai, has been also longer, because the extent of overvaluation or the time for which it was overvalued was even longer. So that is the beauty about investing, and that is why I think investing becomes more and more interesting. Otherwise, why do you have headlines? Like recently, there was a headline in India where a prominent wealth outfit in India, that person's private client group head said that now Warren Buffett is ineffective because he's gone wrong completely. In April, he gave a sell call, or he said that I don't understand what's going on in the markets, and markets went up. And Warren Buffett sold some airline stocks, and airline stocks have gone up. So that's the beauty of the markets, because the price is not determined by Warren Buffett. It is determined by buyer and seller. And so that's why there is nothing called consistency. There is something called consistency of process. And if you follow a consistent process over a long period of time, you're likely to win. And in short periods of time, you're likely to be not sure. And every fund manager will go through ups and downs. If you believe that a fund manager will go through only ups, it's a problem. And I believe that every fund manager will have to, over a period of time, create a process which allows that fund manager to deliver over a cycle. And that is a challenge that the investor community will realize over a period of time. And that is a problem at this point of time for many of the active investors, because the active investors are periodically asking, why should I choose this route? So in the month of March, quality people used to ask me, why do I have to rely on anything other than quality? But look at the underperformance of quality after March. It's been doing abysmally to the point that the underperformance is already 10% between March and now. Is it going to be much more? Possibly. But the reality is, in the month of March, if you had looked at it, for the last 3 years, the outperformance of quality was phenomenal. But after March, the underperformance of quality has been phenomenal again. And that is the beauty, that there is no one style which will deliver for you permanently. So today, for example, mega caps is a style has delivered phenomenally anywhere in the world. So active large caps have just got jacked against the index because mega caps have done so well. But will it always perform like that? No. If you look at the period from 13 to 17, active large caps outperform mega caps by a huge margin. Now we are at the receiving end. Active large caps are at the receiving end. But again, everything is a cycle. And you have to be disciplined and follow a process. And if you're disciplined and you follow a process and you have a past record to show that your process has a scope, you are likely to win.
Naren, as you told, all styles go through their phases of underperformance, and there's no process which can win at all points in time. So there's also the thought process from a set of fund managers that since investors won't be able to handle the underperformance or at least long stretches of underperformance, should I rather combine these styles together and hence create a much better experience, or the other way is let the investors do it themselves? So in terms of portfolio constructing, how would you look at it? Would you still want to be pure to one particular style, or you think there is always a scope where from the fund side you can combine different styles together and create probably a far more smoother experience? Because either way, the logic is that over long periods of time, all styles should be able to outperform over a market cycle. So how would you look at this thought process?
That's the tough part, very tough actually. And I don't think it's easy for me to change. So what do you have to do? So what you have to do is for example, I was running ICICI Prudential Blue Chip Fund for only a short while. I realized that I was not suited for running a benchmarked fund, given my natural style. So I ran it for a very short while and I handed it over to people who I thought were much more suited for that fund than I was. So the reality is that you have to choose funds which suit your style. And frankly, if you ask me, as ICICI Prudential, what I did was we created a number of fund of funds. So if you look at it, we have a fund of fund called India Equity Fund of Fund, where we invest in funds even outside our company. We have a fund of fund called Global Advantage Fund of Fund, where we invest again outside our company. We have a fund of fund called Asset Allocator Fund of Fund, which can invest in many equity and debt funds and gold. So why did we choose this model? Because we realized that if we choose this model, we can actually handle these style problems. Because what I believe is even cycles, there is a cycle in style. So my personal view is that the quality style has ended in March. My view was that small cap style ended in 2017. Does it mean that small cap style will never come back in favor? Answer is no. It will come. That's why we've been recommending SIPs. Will quality style at some point of time come back? Yes. But I feel that the quality style's best period was 2017 to March 2020. So at right now, for example, I feel that the mega cap style is possibly at its best point. And from here on, mega caps can't be so good across the world. So if you think mega caps has done well in India, no. Go to US, the top 5 stocks have done phenomenally well.
Right.
So I believe that, each of these styles also operate in cycles. So you would have a situation where value did very well between 2002 and 7. Then failed, then succeeded, then failed. Now it has failed. Now, therefore, there is good chance of success now. So I believe that, if you can handle cycles of styles, I think there is a good scope. But the point is, sometimes you may think that the cycle has come to an end, but the cycle can go on forever, for some more time. So that is the beauty of this whole thing at this point of time, that you might think that a cycle will last 3 years, it may last 5 years. You may think that a cycle will last, the bear cycle will last 3 years, it may last 5 years. So you take real estate now, you are in the 7th year of a bear cycle. How long does bear cycle last? Does it last 3 more years? Does it last 2 years? Are we in the last year of the bear cycle? I don't know. But eventually, I think that is how we created the fund of fund model, because the fund of fund model is the only model which can allow you to actually say, okay, I don't have the style within my company in Global Advantage or India Equity. I can say, okay, I'll invest in someone else's style. And that also I can try to do. And so, for example, we can say, okay, I'll try to move from this style to this style. Now, quality style has worked too well. Now I'll move to value. Value style has done too well. Now I'll move back to growth. From growth, I'll move to quality. Everything can go wrong in timing to some extent, but finally, I believe in cycles. So finally, I think at some point of time, the cycle can overextend, but at some point of time, the cycle has to work. So real estate cycle I thought was overvalued in 2010. Started working from 2013. I thought that mid-cap cycle was overvalued in 2016 October. It started working from 2000 in January, 2018 January. Now I think mega caps are looking overvalued, but maybe it will last another 6 months. Who knows? So I think that's the beauty of cycles, that you and I would want all these cycles to work from today, but it may start working from tomorrow. And but eventually cycles are going to be there. So it's not that you're going to have perpetually, you're going to have US tech companies just shooting up. You're going to have value doing permanently badly. You're not going to have these kind of things. That's not going to be the situation.
And also the other question was, as a contrarian investor, there will always be a lot of times where your portfolio is not working as per your narrative in the short run, because obviously it might take some time for the cycle to turn. And on the other end, you don't have you're dealing with public money, where again the time frames are not too long, so the patience with the public money is also limited. So over a period of time, how have you handled this basic fact that on one end you have a slightly impatient set of investors, and on top of it you can also maybe become wrong in the call that you've taken? So how has this whole process of always having to go against the market evolved over the last 10 years? Have you shifted your timelines, or you still have how long will you wait for your calls to play out?
I think there it's very simple. See, I have two roles, one as a CIO and as a fund manager. So if I look at it as a CIO, for example, Blue Chip is a benchmark fund. If you look at BAF, it has been reasonably benchmarked. So if you look at other funds in the market, in our own basket, many of them are not contrarian. So if you look at our mid-cap fund, it is not contrarian. So you will find that our small-cap fund is not contrarian. So as a CIO, I'm very clear that I'm not going to have the entire public money of ICICI mutual fund. If you look at our entire debt basket, also it's run on a contrarian model. If I'd run it on a contrarian model and said I'm going to invest in all the dangerous NBFC's credit, then that would have been very worrying. So the reality is that it's not that we said NBFC equity or debt. Both we didn't take any contrarian position. The other thing is, it's very easy to say everything is contrarian, so I'll buy it. So we didn't buy any contrarian NBFC equity. I don't think in our company we had virtually any NBFC equity as a contrarian bet at all. Or even if you look at financials, we hardly had any contrarian financials in our portfolio through this period. So, or even virtually any of the contrarian infrastructure stocks in the last 5-6 years. So I would say that, from a CIO angle, I'm very clear that a lot of the money that we manage is not contrarian. And our biggest funds, I mean, if you look at it, Value Discovery has had big positions in different sectors, but I wouldn't call them necessarily contrarian. I would say they are more quality at reasonable price than contrarian. So I would say, yes, some of my funds have been contrarian. There again, I would say that, what you do is you try to hope that you buy different contrarian sectors at different points of time, and you hope that something works. So in our basket, for example, telecom worked. So if you look at it, pharma worked. Power failed so far. So the hope what you have is that different points of time, you will find that suddenly out of the blue, some of the sectors will work. So pharma worked in the middle of COVID. All of a sudden, pharma gave 40% outperformance in the middle of COVID. Telecom suddenly gave outperformance. So I believe that, you can't predict when you'll get outperformance in which sector. And our underweight position in some of the financials also gave huge outperformance in the middle of, in retail financials and NBFCs, quality retail financials. We got huge outperformance in the middle of COVID. So I believe that periodically you will get outperformance, and it has to be that you don't do it in one sector, you do it in multiple sectors, that something will come out of it. So you can never hedge yourself. You can never say, this is my entire contrarian bet, I'll bet on these things. That kind of thing, if you do, then you are in trouble. I think there is a famous UK fund manager called Woodford or Woodward or something,
Neil Woodford.
made a number of mistakes in the last 1 year. And there are important lessons that you have to learn from what he did. And we have all learned from it. So, for example, one of the lessons I learned from 2008 was that you should never, ever try too much contrarian investing in financials as a sector. And after 2008, we never virtually did contrarian investing in financials. One of the lessons that we learned from 2008 was don't do too much contrarian investing in leverage companies. So that was something we never did, actually. So it has been actually a mixed bag, actually. But and as an asset management company, for example, our contrarian bet on being careful in credit actually played out, that today all the investors who looked at credit would agree that, the kind of returns debt funds have given in the last 3 years has been unbelievable compared to equity funds. And I find it strange that 3 years back, no one wanted to invest in any debt fund. And that has been a very, very interesting thing. People mouth saying, I want to do asset allocation, I want to do asset allocation, I want to do asset allocation. And what were they doing 3 years back? Investing in small caps. What were they doing? They're investing in mid caps. And what is the return in the last 3 years is small cap and mid cap returns are zero, I think, right now. What did they not do? Invest in debt. And where did the returns come in the last 3 years? Debt. And why did they not choose debt after saying that they're doing asset allocation? I don't know. And that's something, and through 2017, in every meeting that we have said we have to invest in debt. And still people didn't invest in debt. They were happy investing in small caps, micro caps. People who are doing PMSs and AIFs concentrated on that space. So that's the surprising thing, which I find, that everyone says, I want to do asset allocation. So what does asset allocation tell you to do today? Asset allocation tells you to do today that you have to be careful in mega caps. Very clearly. It tells you that you have to actually take big exposures in AA debt funds because it has the cheapest valuations ever. It tells you you should completely stay away from liquid and overnight funds because they have got the highest valuation ever. But where is the corpus? Corpus is in liquid and overnight funds. Why? I don't have an answer. Why is there no corpus in AA funds and single A funds at this point of time? I have no answer. Why is the corpus of mega cap funds going up? I don't have an answer. So these are some of the interesting things at this point of time. That's why I say, when you say contrarian, I find that people don't do contrarian asset allocation. Today, people are very fond of overnight funds earning 2.5%.
And also, when it comes to building contrarian portfolios, what do you do about the contrarian part which has started to play out? Let's say, take a classic example of pharma or telecom, where almost everybody wants to get into pharma right now. So how do you deal with the contrarian themes which are finally not unloved anymore? So how do you deal with that portion?
There, my colleagues have played a big role in telling me, because I have been used to selling too early. So they have come and tried my best over the last 15 years. I have to thank many of my colleagues in my company for coming and saying, don't sell too early. And that's how I'm trying to pace my exits so that I don't sell it too early. I think what I've learned is that every sector goes from undervaluation to overvaluation and then back to undervaluation. And so we'll have to wait for every sector to get overvalued. So I believe that what I learned from Balanced Advantage Fund as a category is do gradual selling, gradual buying, gradual selling, and gradual buying works best. And when you follow this model of gradual buying and gradual selling, you actually have the best experience to give to investors. So the gradual selling model works best as far as even booking profits is concerned. So you don't take a call that you want to be out of the stock because, or you say, I want to be completely into the stock. Do it gradually.
Naren, you look at cycles to evaluate different asset classes. So you have this phases of different parts of the market. So in that sense, how are you looking at equity? What phase of the cycle do you think equities are in currently?
Yeah, actually, where I'm clear on is US equity. US equity is an end cycle. Every indicator that I look at suggests that US equity is an end cycle. Emerging market, your Indian equity, I'm very not clear actually. And how will emerging market and Indian equity behave in US end cycle ends? That part of it is again not clear to me because India has seen so many cycles in equity. If you look at it, small cap peaked out in 2017-18. Okay, mega cap seem to be going along with US. So to me, if you ask me personally, I will say that it is a mixed cycle. But in that mixed cycle, it looks to me that we are in a cycle where only US is in end cycle. All others are in confused cycle, if you ask me. And that's one of the reasons because you're in confused cycle. We have been recommending asset allocation as a category because we are not clear on whether we are in early cycle, mid cycle. Because you look, sometimes you think in small and mid caps, you are in early cycle. When you think of mega caps, you think you're in end cycle. When you look at value, you seem to be in early cycle. When you look at quality, you look at your finished off, end cycle is over in March. And the cycle is over. On the other hand, if you look at growth stocks, it looks like you're in end cycle. So it's very confusing at this point of time from an India point of view. So that's why when you're confused, I've always found asset allocation or balanced advantage category. These kind of categories work best. So that's where I am at this point of time. So I don't have clarity and I don't think I have because the point is that it's difficult to judge at this point of time because if you look at earnings, they are very depressed. So on depressed earnings, markets are looking overvalued. On book value, markets are looking okay. On market cap to GDP, markets are looking okay. So it's very complicated. I don't think I have clear answers. On our valuation metrics, markets are looking okay. On economic outlook, markets are not looking okay. So on earnings, markets are not looking okay. On to book market is looking very cheap. So I can give you a wide variety of indicators on which the markets are looking cheap. On some set of indicators, I can tell you the markets are looking costly. But I think on whatever indicators you look at, US markets are looking costly, particularly US growth, US tech, etc. So I think there it's very clear.
Naren, what's your broad framework to evaluate real estate and gold and how does it fit into your cycles theory?
Real estate is very simple, actually. I have found that cycle work very well, actually. Just compare mortgage interest rates with rental yield. Today, the mortgage interest rate of SBI and Bank of Baroda and many of the private banks has come down to 7. I think rental yield is about 3.5. So real estate is cheapest in the last 10 years, I would say. So clearly real estate, completed real estate where you are buying an asset where you're sure of delivery or you're sure of the real estate is definitely cheaper than it ever was in the last 10 years. Can it become cheaper? It can become cheaper, but it's not, it is definitely more attractive than it has been in the last at least nearly 10 years, I would say, because today you're at 7 rental yield, assume it's 3.5. That gap of 3.5 is pretty attractive as it stands. So I would say clearly real estate is definitely most attractive in the last 10 years. So the gap there, valuation gap you have to look at is just compare mortgage interest rate and rental yield. Gold, I'm like caught right now because 2 years back we were very positive. So in multi-asset fund, got rechristened at multi-asset fund. We had bought a lot of gold there. It was very well timed. Today, gold is at all-time high. One of my frameworks says don't buy any asset class at all-time high. So on that framework, I can't look at gold. On the other hand, people say it's a proxy to interest rates being at zero. So on that basis, people are very, very positive on gold. So between both these frameworks, I'm confused on gold. So I have decided not to give a view on gold. So I don't have a view on gold. But real estate is getting more and more attractive. And if you get bargains, I think clearly it would be. And I don't think, so you'll have to evaluate the rental yield of that place genuinely and then compare it and do this discussion, I think, clearly. The only problem is buying under construction property is that many of the projects may not come up in the time and in the way people envisage. So you have to be more careful in the under construction projects. But if you get good quality completed projects, I think those are clearly getting more attractive at this point of time. And it has already reached that shape. And if as interest rates fall in the next 6 months, real estate will become more and more attractive.
Naren, broadly, the understanding is that it's very, very difficult to time equity markets, and it's almost impossible to do. Is what is the globally accepted a fact, or probably it's an accepted notion. But however, if you look at a category like balanced advantage fund, or let's say the dynamic asset allocation category, fundamentally what it says is that I will move equity up and down based on the market valuations or any other parameter. So there's a fundament, or in a way, is it like, if you really look at it, are you saying that, are we saying that this category tries to time the market, and on one end we also say we can't time the market? So how does somebody put context into this disconnect if somebody is looking at this BAF as a category?
It's not a timing. It's not a timing market. Basically, it says markets across the world will be volatile. So it makes use of volatility. And I believe that volatility is your friend. And once leverage gets built in the world, volatility becomes necessary, and it plays on volatility. So a year like this year, who would have imagined market will fall like this in March? And who would have imagined markets will go up like that after that? So for such things, it becomes just too good, because I don't think anyone would have imagined that you're going to have a market which will do so well in June, July. And I could have kept a bet with anyone in April that all of us would have said markets won't go up in June, July. But it did. So that's why my reading is that it's just unbelievable how volatility helps that product. So it's not a timing product, it's a behavioral finance product, if you ask me. So it's a behavioral finance product. Over the last 10 years that we have run it, it's, I would say, a behavioral finance product. So taper tantrum, market falls, it gets an opportunity to buy. China problem, market falls, it gets an opportunity to buy. ILFS problem, market falls, gets an opportunity to buy. Something else happens, market falls, it gets an opportunity to buy. Corporate tax cut, market goes up, opportunity to sell. COVID problem, market falls sharply, opportunity to buy. So it's a behavioral finance product. Do you believe in behavioral finance? That's a question you should ask. Forget about timing, etc. Like all that. It's a behavioral finance product. If you don't believe in behavioral finance, then it's okay. But otherwise, it's just a behavioral finance product from my point of view. Why was this product created? It was created based on the behavioral finance problems of 2007-8 time. In 2007, when markets were so overvalued, people wanted to invest in equity. In 2008, when markets were so undervalued, people didn't want to invest in equity. And 2009 markets recovered, and people just didn't make money out of 2007, 8, 9. So the entire product construct was based on the behavioral finance experience of 2007, 8, 9. So I view it as a behavioral finance product rather than anything else. And I believe behavioral finance has played a role in the last 20 years that I have seen. I think it shows that behavioral finance has a role in investing. Because like I said today, people don't want to invest in AA and single A debt funds. I mean, there are so many interesting debt funds at this point of time. People want to invest in liquid and overnight. In 2017, people didn't want to invest in debt funds. They wanted to invest in mid cap and small cap. So like that, I believe that it basically focuses on the problems of behavioral finance, problems of greed and fear. So obviously, if you have conquered greed and fear, you don't need balanced advantage fund. You can do it yourself. So a lot of people are going into doing it yourself at this point of time in the last 2-3 months. But for the people who can't conquer greed and fear, I think doing it yourself will be costly. But there will be people who know how to handle their greed and fear. For them, doing it yourself will be very, very profitable. So that is going to be the question that you will come to know. And when will you come to know? You will not come to know when the markets are going up. It is only after the first meaningful correction you will know whether people who have gone do it yourself, whether they have done it right or wrong. You will not know it on and up. It is like I keep telling people, if you have measured your success on 2007 December, that's not the day to measure your success. As a small cap investor, if you measured your success on 2017 December, that was not the day to measure your success. Like that, if you're a do-it-yourself investor from April 1 today is not the day to measure your success. The day to measure your success is at a different point of the cycle. And for that, what you need to do is the ability to conquer greed and fear. And that's the challenge.
And then you've run this whole BAF category of products almost for the last 10 years. So how has the underlying process or framework of approaching this changed over the last, what's different between, let's say, 2010 when you kind of evangelized the product to right now when you're running it? What's been the overall journey in terms of the thought process, or is it more or less the same?
Journey is we brought interest rates into the argument after watching the QE framework. So frankly, if we had just not brought interest rates into the argument today, maybe our BAF level would have been much, much different. What it would have been is that the BAF level would have been much, much lower. Because interest rates are much lower than what it was 2 years back, the BAF level is clearly today the equity level is much higher. So what we realized was that in a world where interest rates are going down significantly, the equity levels have to be higher. Because your alternate use for equity is debt here, and debt interest rates are much lower than what they were. So that is one thing which we clearly realized at this point of time. The second was actually when it was thought of initially, we didn't realize that we used to think that we can do resets only periodically. Now we can do, even if the market falls in the morning sharply, we buy. If the market goes down sharply in the latter half of the day, we can sell. So we are not committed to a situation where we need to do only rarely based on a month or something like that. So we can do what we want intra-month. So that was a clear change that happened as the scale of the product also improved. That helped, because today the fund is 27,000 crores. That gives us a chance to do many things that we couldn't do. So I would say that, you know, the other thing that is underappreciated is that we invest in debt. And in India, the returns that come out of debt has been singularly underappreciated by investors. They seem to think of debt as some dangerous asset class after the fact that the last 3 years, all debt funds have given superb returns. And people don't realize that all the returns that has come out of the debt component in many of the hybrid funds, the debt component of many of the hybrid funds has given good returns. to investors. And this is across most of the hybrid schemes. Many of the hybrid schemes belonging to many of the asset management companies have delivered very good returns on their debts, right? And people haven't recognized that, actually. So that is the third aspect, I would say. And the fourth, I clearly think, is that, there were people who used to worry, can you manage scale? Can you manage scale? Frankly, we have not had any such problem at this point of time, because somehow I think scale has its own benefits in this category, because we are not limited by large, mid, small, all types of debt, everything. So scale has been less of a problem.
So if an investor is looking at this particular category, obviously he's not going to put the entire amount into this category. While obviously it might be ideal, but that's not what really happens. So let's say for a simple investor who has a 50% equity, 50% debt, where does he fit in the BAF product? Does it get into the equity bucket, or does it get into the debt? How should somebody use this product in the overall asset allocation?
I tell that person to treat it as a 75% equity product.
Right.
That's how I like to think of it. And a 25% debt product.
Right. Naren, the other question was that when investors start building their portfolios with the intent of diversification, sometimes it becomes over diversification. Like you commonly say, it's become a zoo of funds. So the intent is to diversify, but how does somebody make sure that you don't get it over diversified? What should somebody look at? Let's say I'm building my equity portfolio across how many funds, or what should be the diversification parameter? Should it be style, size, and how many? How would you go about with that?
Everyone has a problem here. Everyone has a problem here. Ideal, what Warren Buffett says. Warren Buffett will say 1 or 2 points for up to 100 crores or something like that. That is what he would say. But you know how our Indian system works. That is what I'll say. And if you create too many funds, you will get too much close to the average. That's the problem.
Right. Sure. So also the other thing which is happening across the world is the active versus passive debate, and it's picked up big time on the US and other developed markets. Now, as an active fund manager, how do you see this whole evolution happening in India? And especially, there's also the new leg of factor-based investing, or the quant-based funds also equally competing on the cost front. So how do you see the whole active active management evolve over the next 5-10 years in India?
Yeah, I think as long as the largest companies do the best, there's a serious problem. I mean, today the top 5 companies across the world have done so much better than the other companies. There's no hope for active at this point of time across the world. But if you think that the top 5 companies alone will do very well, I think that's the challenge. The top 5 companies comprising 44% of the index has done so well in India. It becomes such a task. It's become an impossibility, actually. But if you look at the period between 2013 and 17, they meaningfully underperformed the rest of the market. So at that point of time, it was so easy to beat the index. And today, after 2018, it is such a bad situation. So I think these are all problems. And so I would say that if you think that the biggest companies are going to continue to do well, I think passive will do much better than active. Factor-based investing, I think first you need to understand the factors. I think there's much more work to be done in India and other places than in other places. I don't think we are close to that place where you can replace factor-based investing easily. But on passive, I think till the time large mega caps do well, I think passive will be doing well.
One last question, Naren. So as a contrarian investor, let's say you have to advise a a new budding fund manager who wants to do this, what do you think is the most difficult thing to replicate in a contrarian strategy? Is it more on handling the actual client base or the behavioral? What do you think is why is it so difficult to replicate? Where does the investment edge lie for somebody doing this strategy?
See, I think no, if you look carefully at the market, you'll find that after one big up-down cycle, many people go a bit more contrarian because after that first up-down cycle, the momentum guys are in deep trouble. The momentum people are in very deep trouble. So what happens is, it is not that many of us started off as being contrarian people, or people who are, but the 2007, 8, 9 made up many of us into this kind of frameworks. So I believe that I think that there is a huge challenge. What till the first up-down cycle happens, you actually tend to think that go with the wind. But finally, when the wind changes direction, you realize what are the problems of the wind changing direction. And that part of it, first I saw in my career in 95. And 2000 was the second time it happened. Then 2008 was the third time it happened. So what happens is, when the wind changes direction is when there's a huge problem that happens. So that is why, for me, I believe that I would say, to be recognizing cycles, forget contrarian, to be recognizing cycles and operating on the using cycles is absolutely necessary for a long-term fund manager. Forget the contrarianness. You can be momentum in the early part of the cycle, always. There is absolutely no problem. It is only in the latter part of the cycle that you have to display contrarianism. That is how I look at it. And that is, I believe, a necessity. And as you manage more and more money, it is necessary to be contrarian, because otherwise you're going to be stuck with some lemons. Just imagine if you were at the end of the 1999 cycle, if you were sitting with all the technology stocks at the end of the cycle, and you were a big fund manager, or in 2007 cycle, at the end of the cycle, you were sitting with all the infrastructure stocks and you were the big fund manager. Just imagine what would have happened to you. So I believe, forget contrarianism, I would say you have to recognize cycle, and towards the end of any big cycle, you have to change your stance. And you can't be late. You can't be late. You can be a bit early. If you're too early also, you might lose your job. That's a problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Naren, for all those fascinating insights. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Naren. Thank you so much.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.